But I think he makes it clear now that the people who serve, it's not Israel, it's not that small nation anymore. It is not this chosen people to be ambassadors, but is now those and only those who serve the Lord. And we're going to see what that means, I hope. Hey, and welcome to day 208 of Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and I am reading through the Bible in 365 days using the chronological Bible reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com. And so you would just download their free chronological reading plan. Make sure it's chronological because they have a bunch of reading plans. And then you would start reading, and today is again day 208. It is July 26th, and our reading today is Isaiah 52:13 through 57. And I'm just going to start by saying, I don't know about you guys, but I am feeling really overwhelmed with Isaiah. I remember, and I've read through Isaiah a few times. A couple of times I've read it straight through, right from start to finish, and I've just been completely lost. Like I couldn't get a grip on it at all. Here, I definitely feel like I have a better understanding of it, but it's deep. It's just a tough read, right? So it's really challenging trying to understand what is happening, what hasn't happened, what might happen, what will happen. Hopefully knowing maybe down the line what did happen, right? So like it's just prophecy is a really big bear, and so it's really something that's hard to. I was gonna say it's hard to conquer, but I'm gonna say we can't conquer it, right? Like we can't find it perfect. There are things in here that I have questions about that I'm like, I don't know if that even happened yet. Maybe it's not going to happen, and I'm not sure. And then what does that say about God promising it or saying it did happen if it doesn't happen? Or maybe again, I just don't see that it did happen. So anyway, it's all a bit overwhelming. And so if you have felt overwhelmed like me, you're in good company. If you have not felt overwhelmed, if you're sort of just reading it and going, yeah, no, this is exactly, then more power to you guys. And I would love to have your heart and spirit during reading, but I know that we're all different, right? And that's the beauty in some of us. Like I thrive on books like First and Second Kings. I love those books. I want to write down as much information as possible. And I feel like I capture it, right? I can really understanding it. It kind of sits in my heart. But these prophetic books are, like I say, just a little bit more difficult for me because I want to understand them, right? I have a desire to know what God is trying to say because I want to know him as much as I can possibly know him. So anyway, we are going to get started in this reading of Isaiah. At this point, we are, again, probably in the time of King Hezekiah. In the 700s is definitely where we are because that's when Isaiah has lived. And so he is prophesying probably about the world to come. Does that mean in his lifetime? Does that mean not far after his lifetime? Does that mean hundreds of years after his lifetime? Does that mean thousands of years after his lifetime? I wish I had an answer for you. But we will see some of this in the future. So that I do know. So right now we're just going to read it. And I've mentioned before that I like to read things as they come historically, which is the whole purpose of me reading this in chronological order. I'm going to make sure my mic is working. That's the whole reason why I wanted to read it this way, is because I want to take it the way that the people at that time took it. That's the way I try to deliver it to you guys, as the way that your first reader would have read this. And then, of course, after I do that as a first reader would have read it, then I try and say, like, what does that mean? How does that look today? And all those other kind of things. So let's get started. Yesterday, we were, God is speaking through Isaiah, and he's just giving all these prophecies. And essentially, it's saying, I'm going to punish you, but you're going to come back. I'm going to punish you, but you're going to come back. I'm going to punish you, right? Like, so it's this, he just keeps going back and forth. Let me tell you why I'm going to punish you, but I'm going to bring you back. And let me tell you why I'm going to bring you back. And I'd like to see this happen when I bring you back, right? Like, so those kinds of things. So he's been talking about this servant that is going to be sent. Now, yesterday I had mentioned the way I feel like it's written, the servant seems like it's Isaiah. Maybe it is Isaiah. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's somebody that hasn't come yet, right? Like, so I want to keep my options open in a way to understand who this servant could be. So today we go into, we're in Isaiah 52, starting in 13. So when we ended yesterday, it was essentially that God was going to save his people and they needed to arise and come up because they were going to be saved. It's sort of like they needed to step out, right? Like, so you're in this nation, you've been taken, and now it's time to come together, arise, follow me, and then I'm going to lead you out of Israel. I'm sorry, out of Babylon. And then he goes into verse 13 and he says, see my servant. So he finishes in verse 12 and he says, but you won't leave in haste or go in flight, for the Lord will go before you. The God of Israel will be your rear guard. See, my servant will act wisely. So I'm thinking that the servant is going to be the one that brings them out of there, right? Because I know that my reading has sort of torn this up a little bit, but Isaiah didn't. So I don't want to make it that it as if it's a completely separate reading. So he says, see, my servant will act wisely. So now the servant is going to be raised. He's going to be wise, right? He's going to act wisely. He's going to be raised. He's going to be lifted up. He's going to be highly exalted. And many will be appalled at him. So many were, it says many were, just as there were many who were appalled at him. His appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being. So something happened that disfigured him. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. Because what they were not told, they're going to see. So now they're going to see, and now they're going to understand. So they're going to look at him. He looks kind of jacked up, but their mouths are going to be shut up because when they see him, they're going to see something, and they're going to understand something. Moving to 53, it says, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He, so again, I think we're going back to that servant. The servant grew up before him like a tender shoot. Grew up before the Lord, I think, like a tender shoot. So we talked about this before. We talked about these olive shoots, right? Like they're the kind of like the baby things that grow up around the big giant olive trees, and they can either be taken out and harvested somewhere else, or their seeds are going to scatter in other places and create new trees, right? So they're like the perfect baby sort of thing that comes and grows up. All right, so it's like a tender shoot, right? And like a root of the dry ground. But then it says, this servant has no beauty or majesty. So like there's nothing about this root. Like the Lord sees and it grows up nicely, but like there's nothing about this servant that we're going to be like, ooh, he's the best speaker. He's the most attractive. We should definitely be following that guy, right? Like there's nothing about him that makes anyone like be drawn to him in a physical way. If you guys remember, both Saul and David were both really attractive. Saul was giant, like so he was the biggest among them, and he was really attractive, right? And David was also really attractive. So that was one of the things that they said about both of them. This new servant that we're going to see doesn't have any of those key features, right? It says nothing that should make us despise or desire him. As a matter of fact, he was despised and rejected by men. He was a man of suffering. He was familiar with pain. And then he was like one from who people hide their faces. He was despised. And we held him, so I think the nation of Israel, we held him in low esteem. So I love this picture that the Lord keeps giving of changing the time period. So he says will, he says did, he says had, he says is, right? Like, so we're going from past to future to present tense, right? All the same, which this is one of those things that kills me, you guys, because I'm gonna say I feel like in a way, like so I guess we could look at it a couple different ways. We could look at it like God is outside of time. And so he sees it all, and it has both happened, it will be happening, and it's currently happening, right? I don't want to take away from that. That could definitely be the thing. Or it could be that God is leaving it open, right? Like maybe there's a plan. Maybe there's a plan where this isn't the only servant that gets sent, right? Maybe there are some servants that get sent, and they all have sort of this same vibe and appeal. And yet the plan, whatever he deems for this servant doesn't come maybe in the first time or the second time, maybe the fifth one that comes, right? I'm putting this out. I always want to say, like, the host, callers and guests, right? Like, you don't need to take the opinion of that person. This is just, I'm trying to get me thinking. I'm trying to get you guys thinking, right? And so I feel like there could be options based on the way that I see it being read, right? Like, there could be different options. I don't want us to dig our heels into one option and not recognize that there might be something else in front of us that God is asking us to see and we're refusing to see because we're stuck inside this idea of it just being this one thing. And then he says, so anyway, so he says he's going to sprinkle these nations, and then he says, that they're going to shut their mouth. This is going to be the suffering servant. And then he says, surely he took up, in verse 4, he says, this is 53:4, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. So this servant took the pain and the suffering of the people of Israel. And then we considered him punished by God. So we were like, wow, this person, we, by the Israelite people, we're like, wow, this person was really punished by God. Man, he must have done something really wrong. Does that sound familiar? We see these like poor people or whatever, or we see people in the streets and we're like, oh man, they must not really be trusting in the Lord, right? Because they're not blessed like I'm blessed. Look at all the blessings that I have around me. Look at the blessings of my backyard, right? And then it says he was crushed, he was pierced for our transgressions. So the servant was punished for the sake of Israel, really. He was pierced for transgressions. He was crushed for iniquities. And that punishment brought the Israelites peace, right? So because he was punished for them, then they had peace because of that. And it's because the Israelites have all gone astray. So like sheep, they're sort of like running around, they're doing whatever they want, they aren't listening. And by the way, like sheep, like they follow the herd. And we've all called this, I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, sheeple, which is terrible. But like when you go to, let's say a grocery store, right? And you see 18 people in one line. And then you like stand in that line because you think that's the only line and you don't recognize there are 4 other open lines, but you saw all those people standing in line. So you're like, oh, obviously that's the line. Like I always call that sheeple. Like we don't sort of look out on our own, but what we do is we see everybody sort of congregating. So we think that that's the right place to be. Right. And so it, in some ways, maybe like a hive mind or right. Or again, like sheep. Right. And then it's the same thing. Like when one goes astray, others go astray. We draw each other astray with them. I go, oh, I see that. Why are they running off? Oh, that I feel like I want to run off in that direction. It's natural for us. Unfortunately, it's not good for us. So we've gone astray because we forget who our shepherd is. We forget to follow our shepherd. We're like, oh, yeah, that guy up there, that's the guy I'm supposed to be following. I'm not supposed to be following all of those people. I forgot. So I got to go back and I got to look at that guy again. So we've all gone astray. It says he was oppressed, he was afflicted, he didn't open his mouth. And then Israel does not try to protect him. So in no point is Israel like, no, this is our guy. This is our servant who is leading us to victory, and don't do anything to him. They never do that. And then in the next section, it says, in verse 9, I thought this was really interesting. It says, he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. So he had both a grave of the wicked and with the rich. Do the wicked and the rich have the same grave? I'm going to assume they do not, but maybe they do. Like maybe they're one, they're 2 sides of the same coin. I'm not really sure. But I thought it was interesting because then it would be like he's assigned 2 graves, right? One with the wicked and one with the rich. What might that mean? We can certainly look for that later and see if that means anything. And then in verse 10 it says, yet, but it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. So his life is an offering, right? But then it says he's going to see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hands. So how is he going to die, and yet he is also going to see his offspring? Does that mean the servant is going to come back to life? I feel like that might make sense, right? After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. And then it says this servant, by the servant's knowledge, he is going to justify many and bear their iniquities. So what he's going to do is he's going to make them right? And then he's going to bear their faults. So Israel went astray, and then this servant, through his knowledge, is going to make them right. So somehow this servant, like, I'm going to say it's a recognition of like what David did, right? Because God constantly says, I'm going to save this nation for my servant David. right? I'm going to do this because of my servant David. I'm going to follow the covenant because of my servant David. I'm going to keep descendants on the kingdom because of my servant David. This feels much like the same. By the servant's knowledge, the righteous, or my righteous servant, will justify many. So because of this guy, many are going to be made right, and then he's going to bear the faults of those people. So this guy and this guy alone, this servant alone, is going to bear the faults and make right the people who do wrong, right? And then he's going to have a portion. And then because he poured out his life unto death, and he was numbered among the people who did wrong. So this servant, even though he did all this right, was considered wrong. He bore the sin of many, and then he made intercession. So like he comes in between the transgressors and God. And then we follow up and we say, so sing, barren woman who never bore a child, because now I feel like he's turning the tables. So the servant's going to do all this, right? And sing, because bad times, they're coming. So I feel like he's going back and going, bad times are coming. Because it's great if you didn't have any kids. The person who had kids, that's not so great, right? The person who, the more of the children of the desolate woman, right? And then it says, make your tents bigger. Don't be afraid. You're going to go, but I'm going to bring you back. Remember the same message. You're going to go, but I'm going to bring you back. Verse 7, for a brief moment, this is 54:7. For a brief moment I abandoned you, but with deep compassion I will bring you back. Verse 9, it says, to me, this is like the days of Noah. Remember in the days of Noah when he said to Noah, the flood came, and he said, listen, I'm never going to do this again, because I know that in your hearts it's always going to be wicked. So I'm never going to flood the earth again. He doesn't say he's never going to punish people again, but he says, I'm never going to flood the earth again. Now listen to what he says. In verse 9, he says, so I did that then with Noah. And he says, now I have sworn not to be angry with you, never to rebuke you again. So it looks like after he brings them back, right, after all this punishment and the servant and all this kind of stuff, right, he says, I'm never going to punish you again. So he's never going to, this is what I'm thinking by punishment, right? He's never going to make nations, making sure the mic works, always making sure the mic works. He's never going to make nations hold Israel down again, right? Because this has been a constant cycle of other nations destroy you, then you turn to me, I build you back up again, and then I destroy those nations. And then you turn away from me, and then other nations destroy you. And then you turn to me, and right? Like, see, this is like this constant cycle that he's had of other nations, and it's just mass destruction, right? They've been sort of like destroying each other. And it's because, again, he's been calling them back to him, calling him back. And he says, I'm not going to do that again, right? That the era of that is going to be done whenever this gets fulfilled. The era of that looks like it's going to be done. And then they're going to rebuild, and it's going to be better. He says, I'm going to make your battlements of rubies, your gates of sparkling jewels. All your children will be taught by the Lord. Like, what could be better than that? And then in verse 16, he says, I made it all. See, it is I who created the blacksmith, the one who fans the coals into the flame and forges the weapon. So I'm the one who did this to you, right? And then he says, no weapon forged against you now is going to prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage, ready, of the servants of the Lord. I want to make very clear, this is their vindication. I want to be very clear about this, because we're going to move on a little bit and go into deeper detail. This says the servants of the Lord. This does not say Israel. So let's be clear. And someone might go, that's not, it means Israel. And you might be right. I always caveat, you might be right. But I think he makes it clear now that the people who serve, it's not Israel, it's not that small nation anymore. It is not this chosen people to be ambassadors, but is now those and only those who serve the Lord. And we're going to see what that means, I hope. So not the chosen people of Israel, but the servants, the one who follow and serve him. Because a servant means you serve. I do what he tells me to do. I'm serving him. And then he follows in 55. He says, so come, all you who are thirsty, all of you have no money, right? So he's calling to everyone. I don't think this is just to Israel anymore. He says, this is free. Come and get it. When you are thirsty, when you are hungry, come to me. Come and get it. He says, he says, come buy wine and milk without money and without cost, without cost, because the servant paid that price. Again, I feel like this is what I'm saying, right? The servant paid that price. So now this is a free offering to you. Okay, so come without money, come without, buy this milk and wine and all this stuff without cost. And then he says, eat what is good. So God is now making an everlasting covenant. Ready for this? I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David. So here I go again, talking about that one servant, right, that did those things. I have made him a witness to the peoples, a ruler and a commander. Surely you will summon nations you know not, and nations you do not know will come running to you because of God. So now I feel like he is opening it up. He has never kept it from people. So I've made that, I believe, I've made that clear over and over, right? People have come, the foreigners, he's always made welcome in the land, and they were able and they were told they were to follow the covenant of the Lord, right? They were to give offerings and do all those kinds of things. But this seems like it's more significant. Like it is, like he's like, now you're kind of going out and you're asking them to come in. So it says, seek the Lord while he may be found, call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, right? And he will have mercy on them, and to our God, he will freely pardon. So don't hold anything from any nation. Now we're coming together. You're not keeping anything from anyone. You are freely seeking out and offering the Lord to everybody. And he's like, this is, your thoughts are not my thoughts. And I think he's saying this because like, this is something new. And he has mentioned a few chapters back, right, in Isaiah, he's like, something new is coming. I've told you all the old things. I've reminded you of the old things. I've reminded you of the covenant we had and all that stuff. And then now I'm going to show you a new thing. And he's like, for my thoughts aren't your thoughts. My ways aren't your ways. You don't really get what I'm doing. And I know that, but like, I'm higher than you are, right? And your job is to let the wicked come in. So he says in verse 11, so then my word goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. So it's like you have to forsake all of your wickedness, right? And turn to God. And now we're going to have less punishing and more sort of like loving, right? So less of this like punishing nations and then more calling, right? So we're going to call everyone. And then it says, this will be the Lord's renown for an everlasting sign that will endure forever. The thorn bush is going to grow. I'm sorry, instead of the thorn bush is going to grow the juniper. So like instead of like prickly things, a really pretty flower is going to grow. Instead of briars, myrtle will grow, right? That's going to be the everlasting thing, right? Like, so it seems like instead of pain, it's going to be beauty. We're going to have beautiful things because of these things that we've been given by the Lord. But this is what you need to do. You need to maintain justice and do what is right. Salvation is close. It's coming, right? So do what is right. Blessed is the one who does this, who keeps the Sabbath without desecrating it, and who keeps their hands from doing any evil. So please, once you come to him, follow him, keep his commands. Let no foreigner who is bound to the Lord say the Lord will exclude me, because now we're excluding nobody anymore. To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, I'm going to give them within my temple a memorial and a name. So now nobody who is unclean, like remember when we did all of those, and I hope you listened and followed, or at least have been reading or whatever, because if you remember, we went back, some of these people, the foreigners, the eunuchs, these people were not allowed in the temple, right? They weren't allowed to set forth or set their feet in the temple ever. They were always to be outside of the temple. So they were never fully embraced by the community of Israel. And God did that on purpose. God always made sort of a barrier between, because he cleaned his people, Israel, right? And then even with Israel, there was a barrier with the Levites in between Israel and the Lord, right? So there's always this like protection of cleanliness. And now he's like, that's gone. That's broken. Don't keep them anymore. So now the eunuchs can come in, and I'm going to, as long as they're following me, I'm going to give them a name. The foreigners can come in, right? And it says they're going to be better than sons and daughters. They're going to have an everlasting name. So better, could you hear this? They're going to be better. Sons and daughters are Israel, by the way. And it's like the foreigners, the eunuchs, they're going to be better than them, right? I'm going to bring them to my holy mountain. I'm going to offer them joy in my house of prayer. This is for all nations. I'm going to gather still others to them besides those already gathered. So he's gathering everyone. But he says, come, all you beasts of the field, come and devour all you beasts of the forest. So I'm doing this, watch this in the future. But for now, come, all you beasts of this field, excuse me, let the beasts devour Israel's watchmen. I'm thinking the watchmen, so watchmen are literally people who watch over the nation of Israel. So maybe these are Israel's leaders. Maybe it's literally just watchmen, right? The people who are watching and supposed to be protecting. But I think possibly it's like Israel's leaders that are supposed to be protecting Israel. And from now they're coming in and they're going to devour all those people because they didn't watch them, right? They didn't protect them. They didn't keep them following the Lord. And then we go to 57:1. It says, the righteous might perish. And then it says, the righteous perish and no one takes it to heart because they're going to be spared from the evil. Those who walk uprightly are going to enter into peace. They find rest as they lie in death. So in this kind of this area, the righteous are going to die, but that's going to be peaceful because what's coming is not going to be good. But then it says in verses 3 to, all the way down to 10, it's essentially like, let's go, wicked ones. Bad stuff's going to happen to you. You, come here, you children of a sorceress, you offspring of adulterers and prostitutes. I'm going to go back again and I'm going to say, this is talking about the nation of Israel. So this is all about the Israelite people. And it says, who are you mocking? At whom do you sneer? Right? Like you've poured out drink offerings, you've offered grain offerings. This is not, you're not doing but anything to the Lord. Right? So it says, behind your doors and doorposts, you put pagan symbols. So you're going back there and you're offering all this stuff, but then you are putting pagan symbols behind you. You went to Moloch with olive oil and increased your perfumes, right? Whom have you dreaded and feared that you have not been true to me? Like, why are you turning to anyone else? And then he follows up, and I love this. He's like, is it not because I've been silent that you don't fear me? So you're not afraid of me because I've been too quiet with you guys? He says, when you cry out for help, let your collection of idols save you. But then it follows up and it says, except whoever takes refuge in me will inherit the land and possess my holy mountain. So he's still giving them sort of an out, right? As something to let them come back to. And then he says, he follows in verse 13 and it's 15, sorry, it says, for this is what the high and exalted one says, God, he who lives forever, whose name is holy. He says, I live in a high and holy place to revive the spirit of the lowly. So this is what he's doing. He's reviving them. And he says, I'm not going to accuse them forever because if I did, they would faint away, right? Because they wouldn't be able to handle it if I did this forever. I was enraged by their sinful greed. I punished them and I hid my face, but I will guide them and restore comfort to Israel's mourners, creating praise on their lips. So here we go again. I'm going to punish you, but I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to punish you, but I'm going to bring you back. And he says, but the wicked are like the tossing sea which cannot rest, whose waves cast up mire and mud. There is no peace for the wicked. That's it. Done for today. That was like massive, right? I mean, that's just a great ball of information. Guys, pray on this. So don't forget to be in prayer all the time. Like, I always say, don't just sit and listen to my words. Don't just do your reading. Like, don't just kind of be reading this by, like, I have to do my reading today and I have to get this done. Be in prayer with the Lord because he is just giving so much information. He is sort of like filling your cup with who he is. And I don't want you to neglect any of it. I don't want you to let any of it go and just be like, oh, this doesn't make sense, so I'm just going to leave it. Dig in and then move on when you're like, okay, my brain is full. I'm going to move on. And then we will come back again next year, right? So there's always extra time. Okay, so please like this, share, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ring the bell for notifications if you haven't. And I'm grateful if you guys stayed with this, if you found this a blessing. Obviously, I'm thrilled and happy for that. Keep reading, guys, and I will see you tomorrow.